Welcome back. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's just drift into something a little softer tonight. We're going to spend the next couple of hours going deep into the world of South Park's characters. Not the controversies, not the politics, not the headlines, just the facts, the backstories, the little details most people never noticed across nearly 3 decades, and the quiet history of a show that has been running since the summer of 1997 without ever quite sitting still. So pull up your blanket, settle into wherever you are, and let's go. Section 1. Stan Marsh, the everyman who carries the weight. There is something almost soothing about Stan Marsh. In a show built around chaos and loudness and characters who constantly explode in every direction, Stan has always been the one standing a little bit to the side, usually looking mildly horrified at whatever is happening around him, occasionally throwing up because he gets nervous whenever he tries to talk to a girl he likes. Stan Marsh is described, both by the show's creators and by the show's own official website, as a normal, average American mixed-up kid. That phrase, normal, average American mixed-up kid, was chosen with care, because the whole point of Stan is that he represents what a reasonable person looks like inside an unreasonable world. And if you watch South Park with that lens, the show takes on a kind of gentle weight it might not seem to have on the surface. Stan is voiced by Trey Parker, one of the show's two creators. And it's not a coincidence that Stan is the character most directly modeled on Parker himself. The family structure of the Marsh household mirrors Parker's own childhood quite closely. Stan's father, Randy, is based on Parker's real father, also named Randy, who was himself a geologist, which is exactly the same job the show gives to Stan's father. The first name Randy, the profession of geologist, the general energy of a well-meaning but frequently embarrassing dad, all of that came from Parker's actual life growing up in Conifer, Colorado, a small mountain town not entirely unlike the show's fictional South Park setting. Stan was born on October 19th, which makes him a Libra. He is 10 years old, though, like all of the main characters on the show, he has remained 10 years old for the entirety of the series. He lives on Avenue de los Mexicanos in the town of South Park, Colorado, in a house he has occupied since the very first episode. His mother is Sharon Marsh, and his older sister is Shelley, who torments him with a kind of cheerful relentlessness that only older siblings can fully understand. His best friend is Kyle Broflovski, and their friendship is, according to Parker and Stone, a direct reflection of their own friendship. The two creators have said many times that Stan and Kyle are them. Not perfect copies, but emotional echoes. The loyalty between Stan and Kyle, the way they talk each other through things, the way they sometimes drive each other crazy but always end up back together, all of that is drawn from the bond that Parker and Stone actually share. What makes Stan interesting, and what gets somewhat overlooked because of the attention given to Cartman and Butters and Randy, and is that Stan is frequently the character who delivers the most earnest moral observations in the entire show. He is often the one who ends an episode with a speech about what they all learned, and while those speeches are sometimes played for laughs, they are also often genuinely thoughtful. Stan is the character who, when something is wrong, says it is wrong. He doesn't always know how to fix it, but he notices it. And in a cast full of people who are either actively causing problems or gleefully ignoring them, that noticing matters. Stan has a steady on-again, off-again relationship with Wendy Testaberger throughout the show's run. Their relationship began in the very first episode when Wendy sent him a note, and Stan immediately vomited on her shoes due to his nerves. That established a dynamic that would define their partnership for years. Wendy is composed, Stan is undone by her, and yet somehow the two of them find their way back to each other. They have officially broken up multiple times over the course of the series, most notably when Wendy ended things in the 7th season, only for them to reconcile 4 seasons later at the end of season 11. There is a darker strand to Stan that emerges in the later seasons, beginning most explicitly in season 15 with an episode called Lydetki Yabald, You're Getting Old. In that episode, something unusual happens. Stan turns 10, and in the process, everything in his world starts to literally look and sound like excrement. Music sounds like farts. Movies look like waste. The things that used to bring him joy just stop working. So Parker has been open about the fact that that episode was semi-autobiographical, drawn from a period in his own life when he felt genuinely depressed and disconnected from the things he used to love. Stan becomes, in that storyline, a character dealing with a kind of early onset cynicism that is played with more sincerity than the show usually allows. That arc also featured Randy and Sharon getting divorced, something that rattled the entire established order of the show. The divorce did not stick. Randy and Sharon reconcile in the very next episode. But the fact that the show went there at all, and the fact that Stan's emotional response to it felt genuinely raw, showed that the character was carrying more depth than he was often given credit for. In later seasons, Randy's increasing dominance of storylines has occasionally pushed Stan into more of a reactive role, but Stan remains the emotional anchor whenever the core four boys are at the center of things. When the boys' friendships fracture, when Cartman does something truly unforgivable, when Kyle is in genuine danger, it is almost always Stan who registers the human weight of the moment first. His voice, delivered by Parker, has a slight nasally quality in the earlier seasons that softens and warms in the later ones. Parker once described Stan's voice as his own voice, but slightly younger, slightly more uncertain. There's a quality to it that keeps Stan sounding genuinely like a child, even as the show ages around him. Stan's catchphrase from the early seasons, the moment where he figures something out and says it to the audience, was usually delivered as a kind of summary. "You know, I learned something today." Those speeches became a running gag, something the show eventually started to subvert and deconstruct. But in the earliest seasons, they were played somewhat sincerely, and they anchored the show's sense of itself as something that had a point, not just a punchline. The fact that Stan's family lives at 260 Avenue de los Mexicanos, a detail confirmed in the season's 16 episode Reverse Cowgirl, is the kind of tiny background detail that rewards close attention. The show is full of things like that, small, precise specifics that feel like they were placed there for someone to eventually find. One detail about Stan that is easy to miss is that his catchphrase of, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," which he delivers at the beginning of almost every episode in the first 5 seasons whenever Kenny dies, is not something Stan delivers alone. He says, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and then Kyle finishes it with, "You bastards." That call and response, delivered thousands of times across those early years, became one of the most recognized phrases in the history of American television. But it is a duet, not a solo. It only works because Stan and Kyle deliver it together. That, too, feels like something the show put there on purpose. Stan Marsh will probably never be anyone's absolute favorite character in South Park. He is not as explosively funny as Cartman, not as heartbreaking as Kenny, not as spectacularly unhinged as Randy, but he is the still point in a turning world. Yet he is the character you come back to when you want the show to make sense. And in a show where making sense is never guaranteed, that is no small thing. There is a small, beautiful detail about Stan that lives in the background of the first season and rarely gets discussed. When Stan tries to talk to Wendy, when he genuinely tries to express how he feels, his whole body rebels against him. He vomits. Not metaphorically. Literally, physically, completely. His feelings are so overwhelming that his nervous system stages a protest. It happened in the first episode and became a recurring element of their early relationship, and the show plays it entirely for laughs while also, if you let yourself feel it for a moment, being a completely accurate description of how first love works for a lot of people. The sensation of caring so much about what someone thinks that your entire system goes offline. Most shows about children would describe that in words. South Park just has Stan throw up on her shoes. Stan is the character who is most often asked to deliver the show's conclusion, the moral of the episode, the thing that has been learned. These speeches became so associated with him that the show eventually started subverting them deliberately, having other characters deliver them or having Stan deliver them and then have the conclusion immediately undercut. But in the earliest seasons, they were earnest. Stan would stand up and say, quietly and directly, the thing that the episode had been building toward. And the show would let that land. That willingness to be earnest, how to not always deflect into a joke at the exact moment when sincerity was possible, is something that stayed in the show's DNA because of Stan, even as the show grew older and more skeptical of its own earnestness. His dog, Sparky, appeared in several early episodes, and is notable for being depicted as gay. An episode in Season 1 addressed Sparky's homosexuality with a directness that was unusual for 1997 television, and with a conclusion that positioned Stan as accepting his dog completely, without reservation, because Sparky was still his dog and still loved him. It was a small, quiet episode that received significantly less attention than the louder controversies of that first season, but it was one of the clearest expressions of what Stan was as a character, someone who, when it came down to it, just wanted the people he loved to be okay. Stan has played in a death metal band called Crimson Dawn, appeared in a school play, run a pharmaceutical company at age 10, accidentally became a public relations expert, and once challenged an entire environmental movement to examine its own hypocrisy. He has, across 28 seasons, done almost everything a character can do, but his defining quality has never been any of those things. It has always been that quality of noticing, of being the person who looks at what is happening and says with genuine bewilderment, something is wrong here, even when nobody else is saying it, even when saying it doesn't change anything. If you're listening to this, drop a comment and tell me the time and where you are in the world right now. I love knowing who's out there. And if you're enjoying this, now hit subscribe. It really does make a difference and helps me keep making these for you. Section 2. Kyle Broflovski, the voice that won't quit. Kyle Broflovski is, in several important ways, the conscience of South Park. Not the most lovable character, not the funniest, not the one most people would put on a t-shirt, but the one who, when everything goes sideways, stands at the center of the mess and says, out loud and without apology, that something is wrong. Kyle is voiced by Matt Stone, the other half of the creative partnership that made the show. And just as Stan reflects Trey Parker, Kyle reflects Stone. Stone is Jewish, as is Kyle. Stone grew up in the Denver area, as does Kyle. Stone has described himself as someone who has always had strong moral opinions, and a tendency to say them loudly regardless of the social cost, which is also a pretty accurate description of Kyle Broflovski. Kyle's birthday is May 26th, the same as Stone's. The character first appeared, in early prototypical form, in the 1992 short film The Spirit of Christmas, where a character wearing a green hat and an orange jacket can be seen among the group of 4 paper kids. He didn't have a name yet, and his character wasn't defined, but the visual blueprint was already there. By the time Parker and Stone made the second Spirit of Christmas short in 1995, Kyle had a first name, had been established as Jewish, and had the red curly hair underneath his green Ushanka hat that would become his most recognizable physical trait. When Parker was developing the character for the television series, he recalled that there had been only one Jewish student in his entire hometown of Conifer, Colorado. He described that kid as the token Jewish person, and the word token stuck in his mind as he was building Kyle's identity. Kyle is the only Jewish child in South Park, Colorado, and the show uses that isolation in 2 ways. Sometimes it is a source of humor, with Cartman relentlessly targeting Kyle's Jewishness as a weapon. But sometimes, and these are the moments that land harder, it is a source of genuine loneliness. Kyle knows that he is different in a way that no one around him fully understands. Kyle's last name, Broflovski, is derived from Matt Stone's mother's family name. Stone's mother's maiden name was Sheila Belasco Broflovski, and the name was transformed slightly for the show. Both of Kyle's parents in South Park are named after Stone's own parents, Gerald and Sheila. Even Kyle's hair, the famous Jew fro as the show calls it, is based on the hairstyle Stone himself wore as a young man. In interviews, Stone has shown old photos of himself with that exact hairstyle, and the similarity is striking in the most endearing way. Kyle's voice is produced by Stone speaking at his natural pitch and then having the audio raised slightly in post-production, making it sound younger and more childlike. His actual voice, as anyone who has heard Stone speak in interviews knows, is quite low and measured. The transformation into Kyle's voice is entirely electronic, which adds a layer of strangeness to hearing Stone give interviews while knowing he is also the voice of this anxious, morally intense 10-year-old in Colorado. Kyle is described consistently as one of the most intelligent characters in the show. He is an A student, At least according to Mr. Garrison, which is a remarkable endorsement, given that Mr. Garrison is not a reliable narrator of anything. Kyle is good at mathematics, at basketball, and at debate. He is a terrible dancer, something Cartman points out with maximum relish at every available opportunity. He is not particularly musical in any extraordinary way, though he can play instruments when the plot requires it. He has an adopted younger brother named Ike, who the show establishes in the episode Ike's Wee Wee is originally from Canada. The Ike storyline is one of the show's gentler threads. Kyle genuinely loves his little brother, and the episodes that center their relationship tend to be among the warmer ones in the series. Kyle refers to their shared game of Kick the Baby, wherein he literally kicks Ike like a football, as a form of brotherly affection that Ike accepts and participates in willingly. Kyle's relationship with Cartman is one of the defining dynamics of the entire series. It is a rivalry unlike any other in the show because it is not equal. Cartman genuinely hates Kyle, or at least he performs hatred so thoroughly and consistently that the difference between performance and reality stops mattering. And Kyle, in turn, can be driven to a kind of furious helplessness by Cartman that no other character produces in him. There is a moment in the season, 10-episode Smug Alert, where Cartman quietly and anonymously helps Kyle's family, who have moved away, return to South Park. He does it, the show reveals, because without Kyle there to antagonize, his victories feel empty. He actually needs Kyle. The hatred is, in some grotesque way, a form of attachment. Kyle's health is famously poor throughout the series. He is one of the few characters for whom the show maintains some degree of continuity around physical condition. He has had a life-threatening hemorrhoid, contracted AIDS, experienced kidney failure, been diagnosed with diabetes, and suffered from a mild form of gingivitis. His immune system, in the world of the show, seems to take extraordinary punishment. And yet he never stops. He keeps showing up, keeps making his speeches, keeps insisting that what is happening is wrong. There is a Season 5 episode called Kenny Dies in which Kyle, not Kenny, is supposed to die. Parker and Stone had seriously considered permanently removing Kyle from the show because, at that point in the series, his personality overlapped too closely with Stan's. Both boys were moral, both were earnest, both were the kind of character who tried to do the right thing. The creators felt the show didn't need two of that type, but they ultimately changed their minds and kept Kyle, instead using the season to make a permanent death of Kenny and give Kyle a more distinct personality going forward. The post-Season 5 Kyle is a slightly sharper, more volatile version of the character, still moral, but with a shorter fuse and a stronger capacity for righteous anger. Kyle has never had an episode named after him, which is the kind of symmetry that the show seems to maintain without making a big deal of it. Stan has had his name in episode titles, Cartman has had countless, Kenny has had his. But Kyle keeps showing up in everyone else's story, the constant presence without the spotlight, which is somehow completely appropriate to who he is. His hat, the green Ashanka that he wears in every single episode across every single season, is almost never removed. There are only a small number of occasions across the show's entire run where we see Kyle without it, and each time it feels slightly disorienting, like something essential has been briefly displaced. The hat is not just an aesthetic choice, it is part of who Kyle is. It protects something. One final detail about Kyle that tends to get overlooked. He was conceived in New Jersey. This is revealed in the episode It's a Jersey Thing, which involves a subplot about the aggressive cultural invasion of New Jersey culture into South Park. When Kyle is exposed to it, something unlocks in him, a buried Jersey identity that emerges as a kind of alter ego. Bush Parker and Stone wrote it as a comedic bit, but there is something quietly true in there about the way places we come from, even places we never consciously remember, have a way of surfacing in us. Kyle's superhero alter ego is the human kite. In the Coon and Friends storyline that runs through several Season 14 episodes, each of the boys takes on a superhero identity, and Kyle's is built around the concept of kite flying. It is not the most imposing superpower in the show's universe, but Kyle, characteristically, makes it work through force of will and absolute refusal to give up. That is the most accurate possible superhero version of who Kyle is. He has a cousin also named Kyle, Kyle Schwartz, who represents everything Kyle Broflovski spends his life trying not to be. Kyle Schwartz is a walking compendium of Jewish stereotypes. Neurotic, physically feeble, obsessed with money, prone to complaining about asthma and gas and slivers from wooden desks. Kyle Broflovski is driven genuinely crazy by his cousin's existence, partly because Cartman uses it as ammunition. Look, Kyle, yeah, your cousin is everything I've always said you all are. And partly because Kyle himself is aware that the presence of Kyle Schwartz creates a situation where his own identity feels suddenly less stable. There is a thread in Kyle's character around assimilation, around the experience of being the only member of one group in a space dominated by another, that the show rarely makes explicit but that runs through many of his storylines. He is the only Jewish kid. He is sometimes the only person saying a particular thing. And he is often isolated in his certainty that something is wrong when everyone around him is going along. That isolation never breaks him, but it costs him something. It is why, in his best moments, his voice has a quality of effort in it, as though speaking the truth requires pushing against resistance, always. Kyle has been involved in more genuinely political storylines than any other character in the core group. He fought for a Family Guy episode's right to air. He delivered speeches about censorship, about courage, about the cost of staying silent. He was the one who, in the episode 201 from season 14, had the crucial moral speech about using violence to suppress expression. The speech that Comedy Central then censored, without Parker and Stone's permission. By creating one of the most painful ironies in the show's history, the network censored a speech about censorship. Kyle also shares his name and birthday with Matt Stone because Stone simply wrote himself into the show in the most direct way available to him. Stone has said that Kyle is who he was as a child. Earnest, opinionated, unable to let things go, constitutionally incapable of pretending that something wrong was actually okay. That quality, given that Stone is the co-creator of one of the most provocative shows in television history, tells you something about where the show's moral impulse actually comes from. Under all the shock and the vulgarity, there is a Kyle. There is always a Kyle, refusing to stop talking. Section 3. Eric Cartman. Part 1. The Architecture of a Monster. Eric Theodore Cartman is the most famous character South Park has ever produced. He is also, by almost any objective measure, one of the most morally complex characters in the history of animated television. He is a villain, occasionally a hero, frequently a victim, and always the most interesting person in the room. Trey Parker voices Cartman, and Parker has said repeatedly across many years of interviews that Cartman is his favorite character. Not Stan, who is the more obvious self-insert. Not Randy, who shares a name and profession with Parker's own father. Cartman. Parker has described the character as the dark side that lives inside both him and Stone. The things they would never say out loud, given a voice and a face and a pair of yellow mittens. Cartman was born on July 1st. He is 10 years old. He lives with his single mother, Leanne Cartman, in a house in South Park that he essentially runs. The dynamic between Cartman and his mother is one of the most psychologically interesting relationships in the show. Leanne spoils him completely, unconditionally, with a kind of total surrender to his demands that the show presents as both funny and quietly devastating. She calls him poopsikins. She makes him the foods he wants. She backs down whenever he throws a tantrum. She has, by doing all of this, created a child who has never had a boundary enforced, never had a no that actually meant no, and never had to develop the empathy that comes from learning that other people's needs matter too. The show touches on this directly in the episode Test, in which a dog whisperer-style trainer named Caesar Milan is brought in to discipline Cartman. The episode shows with genuine psychological depth that Cartman does respond to firm and consistent boundaries. He starts to change. He becomes, briefly, a better person. And then Leanne relents, and everything reverts. It is played for laughs, but the implication underneath is genuinely sad. Cartman could have been different. He just never was given the conditions to be. His middle name is Theodore, and this has been used exactly once across the entire run of the show. He is almost exclusively referred to as either Cartman, Eric, or by various insulting nicknames that the other boys deploy with creative enthusiasm. His physical appearance is defined by his significant weight, his double chin, his small teal hat with a yellow pom-pom, and his red coat. The show is consistent in presenting his weight as a genuine characteristic, not something that comes and goes. He weighs approximately 90 pounds, which the show notes is considerably above average for a child of his age and height. In the episode Fat Camp, his mother finally acknowledges it plainly. "Those were all lies, sweetie," she says, in response to his claim that he is big-boned. "You're just fat." The origin of Cartman's name is a small piece of trivia that surprises people when they hear it. Many fans assumed the name was a reference to the infamous Nazi ace pilot Erich Hartmann, given Cartman's well-documented affection for Adolf Hitler and his various anti-Semitic schemes. But Parker has clarified that the name Cartman comes from a real person. A high school classmate of his named Matt Cartman. The name was adjusted slightly to Cartman. The character is also loosely based on that same classmate's personality, in the sense that Parker used him as a starting point for imagining what the worst possible version of a person with certain tendencies might become. In the very first Spirit of Christmas short from 1992, the character who would become Cartman was actually named Kenny. The rotund, bossy, easily outraged paper child was Kenny. And when Kenny dies in that short, killed by an evil snowman, the other characters say in their earliest form, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." But they are looking at what is clearly the template for Cartman, not for the Kenny we came to know. When Parker and Stone made the 1995 short for Brian Graydon, the names were swapped. The fat child became Cartman, and the small child in the parka became Kenny. This means that Cartman is, in the deepest technical sense, the original Kenny. He is the one who was meant to die first. There is something almost cosmically appropriate about a character so obsessed with his own superiority having started as a sacrifice. Cartman's psychological profile is something the show constructs with care across hundreds of episodes. Cartman, in the episode The Death of Eric Cartman, summarizes him as a fat, racist, self-centered, intolerant, manipulative sociopath. This is accurate, but it is also incomplete. Because what makes Cartman extraordinary as a character is not just the list of terrible things he is, but the moments, rare and usually fleeting, when something else surfaces. He loves his stuffed animal, Clyde Frog, with a sincerity that feels genuine. He is capable of, on occasion, genuinely protecting something he loves. His cat, Mr. Kitty, is treated with real tenderness. In the episode Major Boobage, when the town is banning cats because people are getting high off their fluid, Cartman hides dozens of cats in his attic, at personal risk to himself, to protect them. He is secretly not okay with cats being harmed. He would never admit this, but the action is real. He also, in whatever twisted way, needs Kyle. The show demonstrates this clearly in Smug Alert, where he cannot enjoy any of his accomplishments without Kyle there to be their audience. Without Kyle's horror, without Kyle's resistance, Cartman's victories feel hollow. He needs an opponent worthy of him, and Kyle is the only one who qualifies. Parker has described Cartman as having been modeled on Archie Bunker from All in the Family. Bigoted, loud, certain of his own correctness, unable to perceive the gap between his self-image and reality. And that comparison illuminates something important. Archie Bunker was also funny, and people loved him. And the discomfort of loving a character like that, of laughing at things you know you shouldn't, is part of what makes both characters so lasting. Cartman speaks German fluently, Spanish conversationally, and has demonstrated Japanese in at least one episode. These language skills are never really explained. They simply exist in him, as if acquired by some process the show doesn't bother to document. He formed the Christian rock band Faith Plus One in the episode Christian Rock Hard, composing genuinely successful music almost entirely by taking existing pop songs and replacing any references to a romantic partner with references to Jesus. The band wins an award. The strategy works. Cartman stands in the crowd receiving applause for a plan that is equal parts brilliant and deeply cynical, and the expression on his face is one of pure, unalloyed triumph. One of the most elaborate ongoing expressions of Cartman's psychology is the character Mitch Connor, which is simply Cartman's left hand with a face drawn on it in marker. Cartman gives Mitch Connor a full personality, a backstory, a voice. He maintains the fiction of Mitch Connor's independent existence through situations where any reasonable person would drop the bit. He even, in one episode, appears to have genuinely convinced himself that Mitch Connor is real, or at the very least, he performs that conviction so thoroughly that the line between knowing and believing stops being visible. Mitch Connor has at various points in the show's history, had an affair with Ben Affleck, launched a political career, and been used as a witness in a murder investigation. The bit operates at a frequency somewhere between improvisational comedy and the specific horror of watching someone lose track of their own performance. What the Mitch Connor storylines reveal under their elaborate comedy is something true about Cartman. He lives in a world of his own construction, populated by characters who may be extensions of himself or may be genuinely real depending on his needs at the time. The boundary between self and performance is not something Cartman has ever maintained carefully. It may be that this absence of a stable boundary between who he is and what he is playing is the source of his greatest power. He believes what he needs to believe, that he becomes what he needs to become. And that flexibility, in a world as unstable as South Park's, is genuinely dangerous. His relationship with his stuffed animals, particularly Clyde Frog, a small stuffed frog who serves as his most trusted companion in childhood, is presented with a tenderness that the show handles lightly but does not deflate. Clyde Frog listens. Clyde Frog does not judge. Clyde Frog is there, sitting on Cartman's bed, witnessing the scheming and the raging and the occasional private moments of uncertainty without comment. In a character who is otherwise defined by his need for dominance, for audience, for the confirmation that he matters, the relationship with a stuffed animal represents the only relationship he has never had to perform for. Section 4. Eric Cartman. Part 2. The schemes, the sadness, and the legacy. The moment that changed Eric Cartman from a loudmouthed child character into something genuinely darker and more memorable was the Season 5 episode Scott Tenorman Must Die. It is widely considered one of the best episodes the show has ever produced, and it holds a 9.6 rating on IMDb across tens of thousands of votes, which for an animated comedy is remarkable. The premise begins simply enough. Scott Tenorman, a high school kid, tricks Cartman into buying his pubic hair for $10. Cartman, thoroughly humiliated, spends the rest of the episode trying to get his revenge. Every scheme he devises fails. Scott outsmarts him at every turn. Cartman is mocked, exposed, made to look foolish repeatedly. And then, in the final act of the episode, as it is revealed that Cartman has orchestrated something far beyond the scale of any normal revenge plan. He has arranged for Scott's parents to be shot by a farmer by maneuvering events so that they trespass on the farmer's property during hunting season. He has then had their bodies ground up and incorporated into chili, which he serves to Scott at a public chili cook-off. Scott eats his parents, and then Cartman licks Scott's tears of grief and says they are delicious. He has won completely and finally, and the cost of winning is something no other character on the show could have paid. Before that episode, Cartman was a bully. After it, he was something else. Something that required a different category. The show has leaned into that transformation ever since, allowing Cartman to commit increasingly elaborate atrocities while keeping just enough of the original comedic energy that the audience can't quite look away. The revelation about Cartman's father, which comes in the Season 14 episode 200 after years of setup, adds a dimension to his psychology that recontextualizes everything that came before. His biological father was Jack Tenorman, a player for the Denver Broncos and the father of Scott Tenorman. Which means that when Cartman ground up Scott's parents and fed them to him, he was unknowingly murdering and desecrating his own father. He killed his father. He fed his father to someone. And he has never found out. The show has never explicitly addressed whether Cartman knows this. His reaction in the episode, when he learns the truth about his father, that is one of the most complex moments of facial acting the show's limited animation style can produce. Something moves behind his eyes. And then the credits roll, and the audience is left alone with that. Cartman's alter egos are numerous and elaborate. His superhero identity is the Coon, a self-created vigilante who wears a raccoon costume and wages war on a world that does not respect him. The Coon is simultaneously menacing and completely ridiculous, which is the right combination for Cartman in almost any context. He also created a hand puppet character named Mitch Connor, who in one episode appears to develop independent sentience and have an affair with Ben Affleck, a subplot that ends with Cartman, deep in the bit, actually crying. Whether that emotion is real or performed is a question the show deliberately leaves unanswered. While he is an accomplished musician, he plays keyboard, violin, drums, French horn, harmonica, recorder flute, acoustic guitar, and pan flute. He started the boy band Finger Bang in the season 4 episode Something You Can Do With Your Finger. He played lead vocals. He was, by the standards of the show's universe, genuinely good. In the future timeline established by the South Park post-COVID special, made in 2021, we see what Cartman becomes as an adult in the worst version of the future. A homeless drunk, living on the streets, alone, having been unable to maintain any of the human relationships that might have given his life meaning. It is a portrait of what happens when someone with all of Cartman's intelligence and all of Cartman's energy never develops the capacity to care about anyone else. But in a different future, one created by going back in time and changing things, Cartman becomes Rabbi Cartman, a Jewish man, apparently happily married to a Jewish woman, genuinely at peace. The show presents this not as irony, but as a real alternative. Cartman could have been fine. Under different circumstances, he could have been happy. The cat Mr. Kitty, who appears in many earlier seasons, is treated by Cartman with a softness he reserves for almost nothing else. He calls her "That's my kitty," and there is no sarcasm in it. She exists in his world as an uncomplicated source of warmth. And because Cartman is who he is, that small fact is somehow more affecting than it would be for any other character. Cartman's relationship with Butters Stotch, the most frequently exploited member of his social circle, has evolved across the years from purely manipulative to something that contained, buried deep under the exploitation, what might be described as genuine fondness. In the most recent seasons, Cartman's cruelty toward Butters has diminished significantly. They still spend time together, still confide in each other in odd ways, and Butters has described Cartman as his best friend in contexts where there is no obvious benefit to lying. The friendship, such as it is, has an authenticity to it that does not fit the earlier model of the relationship at all. Parker has described Cartman as the character he could write forever, which is a meaningful statement for a creator who has been making the show for nearly 30 years. There is in Cartman an inexhaustible engine of story. Because he is clever enough to invent new problems, and emotionally stunted enough to never actually solve them, and charismatic enough that you want to watch him try. He is, in the most technical sense, a disaster, and in the most technical sense, an icon. Cartman's influence on animated television and on comedy more broadly is something that is difficult to overstate. Before Cartman, villainous children in American animation were usually one-dimensional, mean for mean's sake, without the sophistication or the interior life that made a character genuinely threatening or genuinely interesting. Cartman changed what was possible. He demonstrated that a child character could be fully drawn in darkness, could have layers of psychology that the show could unpeel over seasons without ever fully resolving, and could be funny throughout. The door that opened with Cartman was not just about content. It was about the kind of complexity that animation, specifically, could carry. The episode in which Cartman pretends to be a robot in order to learn Butters' secrets, called Awesome O, is a microcosm of everything the character is. He constructs an elaborate robot costume. He sustains the fiction through circumstances that would collapse any normal performance. He lies to Butters, who trusts him completely, with an ease that suggests no friction at all between the lying and the self. He learns everything, and then the episode reverses on him in a way that actually costs him. The ending of Awesome O is one of the cleaner examples of Cartman's schemes producing a genuine consequence. And the look on his face when the consequence arrives has a specific quality that only appears occasionally in the character. A flash of something that might be shame or might just be frustration. It's impossible to tell, and that ambiguity is the whole thing. His brief relationship with Heidi Turner, which runs through the back half of Season 20 and the beginning of Season 21, is among the show's most committed character experiments. Cartman, who has never had a real girlfriend, and who has always dismissed the idea of genuine connection with women as beneath him, enters into what appears to be a real relationship. He holds her hand. He uses pet names. He defends her. He seems in these moments to be genuinely happy, which is not a state the show usually allows him to occupy for long. And then the experiment begins to corrode from the inside because Cartman does not actually respect Heidi or women or anyone who cannot serve his ego's requirements. The relationship becomes toxic in ways that mirror larger cultural conversations, and Heidi is eventually rescued by the weight of her own clarity. It is the show using Cartman as a lens for something real, and it works because the character is built to carry that weight. Cartman's NPR profile, in which he was called America's favorite little expletive by a headline, captures something true. He is beloved by an audience that knows exactly what he is and chooses to love him anyway. He has appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine alongside the other boys. He has generated the most merchandise of any South Park character. He is, by almost any measure, the show's most commercially successful character and its most morally reprehensible one. And those two facts are not in tension. They are the same fact, viewed from different angles. Section 5. Kenny McCormick, the boy who kept coming back. There is a moment in the season 14 episode Mysterion Rises that changes everything you thought you knew about Kenny McCormick. He stands in a church, surrounded by children, dressed as superheroes, and he removes his hood and reveals his face, something the show almost never allows. And he explains, in a voice that is clear and unencumbered and genuinely desperate, that he has a power. That power is he cannot die, or rather, he dies all the time, constantly, in horrible, grotesque, absurdist ways. And then he wakes up in his bed the next morning, and nobody remembers. I don't know why this happens to me, he says. I don't know why I keep coming back. And nobody else seems to notice, and nobody else seems to care. And that is the loneliest superpower in the history of fiction. Kenny is voiced by Matt Stone when he is hooded, with Stone speaking into his cupped hand to create the muffled, incomprehensible quality that Kenny's parka hood produces. When Kenny has been shown unhooded and speaking clearly, in the film South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, in the episodes The Jeffersons and Licecapades and Mysterion Rises, he has been voiced by Eric Stowe, an animation director and producer on the show. It is Stowe who also lends his nickname, Butters, to another character. The show's production team is woven into the fabric of the characters in ways that go remarkably deep. Kenny first appeared, in prototypical form, in the 1992 Spirit of Christmas short, though at that time the character who would become Kenny was the fat one, the character who would later become Cartman. When the names were redistributed for the 1995 short, the small child in the orange parka became Kenny, and took on the role of the one who dies, while the other kids react with horror. Kenneth McCormick, to use his full name, is 9 years old, 1 year younger than the other main boys. He lives on the south side of South Park in a small, run-down house with his parents Carol and Stuart McCormick, and his older brother Kevin. He also has a younger sister named Karen, whose existence is not revealed until the 15th season episode The Poor Kid, and whose relationship with Kenny is one of the most genuinely moving things the show has ever put on screen. Karen, when she is frightened or bullied or alone, is visited by a guardian angel in a black cape and hood, a hero figure who protects her. That guardian angel is Kenny, in his Mysterion costume, watching over his little sister without her knowing it is him. He just wants her to feel safe. And so he becomes, for her, something supernatural and constant and protective. The fact that he is doing this while dying regularly and waking up in his bed to do it all again, and that he never stops, is the most quietly heroic thing any character on the show has ever done. The McCormick family's poverty is a recurring element of Kenny's characterization. His parents are depicted as neglectful and often drunk. The family home is in poor repair. Kenny regularly wears the same orange parka regardless of circumstances because it is, implicitly, the only coat he has. He is teased for his poverty, most consistently and cruelly by Cartman, who uses it as a weapon with the carelessness of someone who has never had to worry about money. And yet, despite all of this, the poverty, the constant death, the erasure of memory each morning, the family that doesn't quite hold together, Kenny is described consistently by the show's writers as the kindest of the four boys. He is selfless in ways that the other characters are not. In the episode Best Friends Forever, Kenny's will includes the phrase "in the highly likely event of my death," which is both very funny and also quietly heartbreaking if you think about it for more than a moment. He has accepted his situation, he is not bitter about it. He writes his will thoughtfully. Sean, the running gag of Kenny dying was introduced in the pilot episode and continued, with few exceptions, through the first 5 seasons. He died of every conceivable cause in every conceivable way. Some deaths are quick. Some are elaborate and drawn out. Some are completely incidental, barely noticed even within the frame of the scene. The deaths are always followed by Stan's, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and Kyle's, "You bastards," which are delivered with exactly the same inflection every single time, regardless of the severity of what just happened. After those lines, rats typically appear to pick at his corpse. It is remarkably consistent in its absurdity. The first time the show acknowledged the gag self-referentially was in the Season 1 episode Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh, where as the episode is about to end, the kids notice something feels unfinished. Kenny, dreading his fate, waits for his death. And then the words "the end" appear on screen. And Kenny is so relieved he celebrates. He survived. It is the first episode he survives, and his joy at the ending of it feels genuine. Parker and Stone eventually grew tired of finding new ways to kill Kenny every week, and in Season 5 they committed to a real death. The episode Kenny Dies is the one they chose, in which Kenny contracts a terminal muscular disease and dies not from absurdist accident but from actual illness, in a hospital bed, with the other boys at his side. It is one of the most unusual tonal shifts in the show's history. Genuinely sad, genuinely quiet, without the usual comedic buffer. Stan cannot watch. Kyle holds it together. Cartman, in a separate subplot, is exploiting the situation for stem cell research in characteristically grotesque fashion. But the death itself, when it comes, lands differently than any of the deaths before it. For most of Season 6, Kenny remained gone. The void was filled first by Butters and then by Tweak, and the show spent a year exploring what it looked like without its recurring sacrifice. Then, in the Season 6 finale, Red Sleigh Down, Kenny returned. No explanation, no dramatic reveal. He was simply there again in his orange parka, as if the whole year had been a dream. The explanation for how Kenny keeps coming back was eventually provided in the episode Cartman Joins Nambla, where it is shown that his parents, every time Kenny dies, create a new Kenny. They simply have another child, and that child is identical in every way, including the parka, yet and picks up exactly where the previous Kenny left off. It is an explanation that is both ridiculous and somehow very sad. Kenny's immortality is not magic. It is his parents, producing him over and over in their poverty and their negligence without even fully understanding what they are doing. The Mysterion arc, which runs through several Season 14 episodes, represents the most fully realized version of Kenny as a character. In it, he is revealed to be Mysterion, a superhero who has the power to die and come back. The tragedy is explicit now, rather than implicit. He is extraordinary, and no one knows it. He is special, and it has brought him nothing but suffering. The show treats this seriously, without deflating it entirely into comedy, and the result is something that stays with you. Kenny's face is one of the most closely guarded visual secrets in South Park's history. The show almost never allows him to be seen clearly, and when it does, it is treated as a significant moment. His face, on the rare occasions it is shown, is pleasant and open and younger looking than you might expect, soft in a way that the parka's shadows usually conceal. He is the only member of the 4 boys who is never shown celebrating his birthday. He is the only one of the 4 without a hat, wearing a hood instead. He is the only one who is definitively 9 rather than 10, and he is the only one who, when you step back from all the jokes and all the deaths and all the running gags, is described by his creators as genuinely good. In the episode Best Friends Forever from Season 9, Kenny is killed and his soul is taken to heaven, where the angels discover that he has a specific divine gift. He is exceptionally skilled at a particular handheld video game, and that skill translates in Heaven's framework to tactical military command. Heaven has been preparing for a war against hell, and Kenny McCormick from the south side of South Park, in his orange parka from a family that struggles, is the person they need to lead it. The episode won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2005. And it is, in its strange way, the most complete statement the show ever made about Kenny. He is special. The world just doesn't know it. The question of how Kenny comes back has been addressed in multiple ways across the show's run. The Cartman joins Nambla theory, that his parents simply have another child who is identical, and including the parka, has a kind of bleak plausibility to it. The Mysterian arc suggests something stranger and more cosmic. In the latter telling, Kenny has simply always been this way, as far as he knows, and no one can tell him why. The show does not resolve which is true. It sits with the uncertainty. Sometimes a person just keeps coming back and there is no explanation, and the absence of explanation is itself something worth sitting with. His orange parka, that constant presence, is worth a moment of attention on its own. It is the same parka across every season, through every circumstance, regardless of weather or occasion or the social demands of any situation. It covers his face, it muffles his voice, it makes him less visible in every frame he occupies, and he never takes it off because it is what he has. There is no second parka, there is no special occasion coat, there is the orange parka, and there is Kenny underneath it, going about his life as invisibly and persistently as he can manage. It is, if you let yourself look at it honestly, a portrait of poverty as identity. Not in a pitying way, but in a truthful one. This is what he had, and he makes it enough. He keeps showing up. Section 6. Leopold Butters Stotch. The sweetest kid in the world. There is a recurring joke in South Park that when the boys need someone to do something terrible or dangerous or embarrassing, they call Butters. Not because Butters is the most capable or the most willing, but because Butters will almost always say yes. He wants to help. He wants to be included. He wants, more than almost anything else, not to let his friends down, even when his friends are actively using him. Leopold Butters Stotch is the de facto fifth main character of South Park, a designation he earned gradually across the middle seasons of the show and has never surrendered. He is voiced by Matt Stone, who produces Butters' voice by speaking in his normal range, with a childlike inflection, a slight stutter, and a southern accent, then having the pitch adjusted in post-production. Stone has described the character as the most directly based on a real person in the show's cast. A South Park producer named Eric Stotch, who was nicknamed Butters and whose earnest, slightly geeky, never quite cool energy provided the template for the character. Butters' real first name, Leopold, is used extremely rarely. The show almost always calls him Butters, and the people who know him best are the ones most likely to use only the nickname. His last name is Stotch, which is occasionally misspelled as Scotch in unofficial references, which seems to bother fans of the character considerably more than Butters himself would ever allow anything to bother him. He was born on September 11th, a detail that the show drops quietly in the episode Awesome O, when Butters mentions his birthday while unaware that the robot he is confiding in is actually Cartman in disguise. The fact that it is September 11th is never made into a joke. It is simply stated and moved past, which is somehow the most dignified way the show could have handled it. Butters first appeared in the pilot episode in August 1997 as a background character with no lines. He was just a blonde kid standing around at the back of the class, unnamed, part of the texture of the school. His first speaking role came in the Season 2 episode Clubhouses, and even then he was a minor presence. The show's official scripts during the first 2 seasons referred to him variously as Puff Puff and Swanson, a temporary name that actually appears on screen in the episode Conjoined Fetus Lady, when Stan calls him by it in passing. The name Butters was properly introduced in the Season 3 episode Two Guys Naked in a Hot Tub, and it stuck immediately. His role in the show expanded dramatically when Kenny was killed off at the end of Season 5. Stan, Kyle, and Cartman needed a new fourth friend, and they selected Butters, a decision they made like a business transaction, interviewing candidates in a process spoofing The Bachelor. Butters was the chosen replacement. But he was thrilled to be included. He was, as always, grateful for scraps of belonging. The boys kept him for 5 episodes and then replaced him with Tweak, citing the fact that Butters was too lame and too square and simply not enough like Kenny. The rejection devastated Butters in the way that only rejection from people you genuinely admire can devastate a person. And it was from that rejection that Professor Chaos was born. Professor Chaos is Butters' supervillain alter ego, introduced in the season 6 episode, Professor Chaos. Deciding that if the world of goodness and acceptance would not have him, he would become a force for chaos and disorder. Butters creates a villain costume from cardboard and aluminum foil, a cape, a helmet, gauntlets, and declares war on the world. His partner and sidekick is a younger boy named Dougie, who takes the name General Disarray. Their plans for worldwide chaos include flooding the earth with a garden hose, putting dog poo in a public restaurant, and changing the labels on food products so that the label no longer matches the contents. The show presents these schemes with complete seriousness on Butters' part and complete comedy on the audience's part. And the combination is perfectly calibrated. Professor Chaos has appeared periodically throughout the show ever since, becoming something of an established figure in the show's mythology. The South Park Police Department is aware of him. He has appeared in the video games South Park, The Stick of Truth, and South Park, The Fractured But Whole, as a legitimate character with actual combat abilities. In the Coon and Friends storyline, he is treated as a real villain, which he is, technically. Butters has also dressed as a girl, as Margarine, in the Season 9 episode Margarine, where Cartman convinces him to pose as a new female student in order to gain access to the girls' slumber party and steal a mysterious device they have. Butters commits to the role with absolute sincerity, including developing a complete character backstory for Margarine. And the episode is one of the most gentle and surprising things the show has produced. His parents, Steven and Linda Stotch, are the most casually abusive parents in the show's regular cast. They ground Butters for things that are completely outside his control. They have grounded him because his father poured rice into his own coffee. They have grounded him because Cartman trashed his bedroom while he was elsewhere. They have grounded him for being named a co-author on the novel The Tale of Scrody McBoogerballs, which he did not write, did not authorize, and which was published without his knowledge. The groundings are their default response to any problem, regardless of causation or culpability, and Butters accepts each one with a weary, baffled patience that is simultaneously funny and genuinely melancholy. Butters' catchphrases, "Oh hamburgers" and "Oh geez," are deployed with perfect timing across hundreds of episodes. They are expressions of mild dismay used in situations where the appropriate reaction from a normal person would be something far more extreme. They serve as a constant reminder that Butters' emotional register is calibrated differently from everyone else's. Things that would produce genuine terror or rage in other characters produce "oh hamburgers" in Butters. He is built to absorb. He is also, the show reveals across many episodes, genuinely talented in ways that get overlooked. He solves a complex math problem instantly in Christian Rock Hard. He is an accomplished drummer. He tutors Stan in unspecified academic subjects at Stan's own request. He is, the show quietly implies, smarter than he gets credit for, and kinder than anyone has any right to expect given how consistently he is treated. His signature song, "Lou Lou Lou, I've Got Some Apples," which he sings quietly to himself while he is doing things, is one of the most purely wholesome moments the show produces. It is a song about nothing. It is a comfort, and it feels when you hear it like something a real child would sing. The arc that best demonstrates Butters' depth is the Imagination Land trilogy, which unfolds across 3 episodes in Season 11. Butters is kidnapped by terrorists and taken inside the world of his own imagination, where he must navigate a landscape populated by every imaginary creature ever conceived. He is terrified, but he keeps going. He is hurt, but he keeps caring. He saves Imagination Land because he is the only one with the capacity to genuinely believe in things, and believing is what makes imagination work. That is the whole argument of Butters as a character, really. In a world built on cynicism, on people who have given up on innocence, on characters who have seen too much to be surprised, Butters still believes. He still hopes. He still shows up. And something about that, carried across nearly 3 decades of a show that is explicitly about the absurdity of the world, feels quietly essential. There is an episode from Season 12 called Butters' Bottom Bitch that is, in its deepest reading, about how fully Butters can commit to a belief. He becomes convinced that he has found a way to help his female classmates make money using their own skills, and organizes an entire enterprise around this conviction with complete sincerity, not realizing what the show is using him to satirize. His earnestness is the joke, but the joke requires you to believe in his earnestness first, and that is why it works. Butters is never performing innocence. He is innocent. The performance, such as it is, comes from the other characters who are using him. The episode Butters' very own episode from Season 5, as is his first proper spotlight episode, and remains one of the most formally unusual things the show has ever done. It is a parody of true crime and after-school special programming, complete with a dramatic narrator and a structure that builds suspense around revelations that are both comedic and genuinely dark. At the center of it is Butters, trying to process the discovery that his parents' marriage contains secrets he was never supposed to know. His response to this information is characteristic. He simply absorbs it and continues, with that specific Butters capacity for metabolizing damage without becoming damaged. In the show's video game South Park, The Stick of Truth from 2014, Butters is the first character the player befriends. But his paladin class and his healing abilities are mechanical expressions of who he is in the show, the one who keeps others going, the one who restores health rather than dealing damage, the one whose value is in sustaining rather than in destroying. It is a beautiful piece of casting. One last thing about Butters. In a future shown in South Park, post-COVID, Butters is a successful and respected adult. He is doing well. The implication is that his qualities, the kindness, the persistence, the refusal to become cynical, served him in the long run in ways they could not serve him as a child. The kid who was always getting grounded, always being exploited, always being told he was not enough, grew up into someone who turned out fine. More than fine, actually. The world that spent his childhood dismissing him eventually made room for him. Now, there is something generous in that, from a show that could have made a darker choice. Section 7. Randy Marsh, the most complicated dad on television. Randy Marsh was introduced in the third episode of South Park, aired on September 3, 1997, in an episode called Volcano. He appeared as Stan's father and a geologist working at the South Park Center for Seismic Activity. He was calm, he was competent, he gave his son reasonable advice. He finished his coffee even after discovering there was a volcanic eruption nearby, which was played as a small joke, but also felt in keeping with a man who has seen enough geological events not to panic. That Randy, the reasonable, measured, occasionally embarrassing, but fundamentally functional Randy, would not survive the decade. Over the course of the show's run, Randy Marsh underwent one of the most dramatic character evolutions in animated television history. Parker has described him as the biggest dingbat in the entire show, which is a remarkable statement for a show that contains Eric Cartman. But there is a specific kind of dingbattery that belongs to Randy alone. Not malicious, not calculated, but spectacular in its commitment and its refusal to be embarrassed by itself. Randy is voiced by Trey Parker, who also voices Stan, Cartman, Mr. Garrison, and an enormous number of secondary characters. Parker's natural voice and cadence are most audible in Randy, perhaps because Randy is based directly on Parker's own father. Randy Parker Sr. was a geologist, as is Randy Marsh. The first name Randy is taken directly from him. The character is, in Parker's words, a version of his father, filtered through 30 years of comedic exaggeration. Randy is 45 years old, holds what may be a PhD in geology. He is referred to as Dr. Marsh on 2 occasions, once by a Republican senator and once by another character, and has a family history that the show contradicts frequently and with apparent relish. The household address, confirmed in the season 16 episode Reverse Cowgirl, was 260 Avenue de los Mexicanos until the family's moved to Tegrity Farms in season 22. His wife Sharon has been with him since childhood, a detail the show establishes by occasionally cutting to flashbacks of their shared adolescence. They have been married, divorced twice, once in the episodes You're Getting Old and Asperger's from season 15 and 16, and once at an earlier point in the series, and reunited both times. Yet their marriage is the kind that works more on persistence than on peace, and Sharon's tolerance of Randy's increasingly unhinged behavior is something the show periodically has her acknowledge directly, usually with a tired expression and a glass of wine. Before becoming South Park's most unreliable geologist, Randy was in a boy band at the age of 18. The band was called the Ghetto Avenue Boys, a parody of the Backstreet Boys, and they had a genuine hit called You Got It. They lived in a mansion. They had millions. They toured. They were famous. And then, 1 year later, they were dropped for being too old, despite being 19. And Randy was left in debt and stripped of everything. He was forced to give up all of his possessions to the studio. But it is the kind of biographical detail that explains a great deal about his subsequent behavior without excusing any of it. He also holds a Guinness World Record. The show establishes in the episode More Crap that Randy has produced the largest bowel movement in recorded human history, weighing in at over 100 Courics, the unit of measurement the show invents for human waste, named after the newscaster, Katie Couric. He defeated Bono for this record, beating the U2 frontman's previously held mark. Randy accepts the trophy with genuine pride. This is who Randy Marsh is. The revelation in Season 14 that Randy produces music under the name Lord, the New Zealand pop star played completely straight without qualification, is another layer of the character that the show commits to absolutely. Randy is Lord, and he performs under the stage name. He writes the music. He wears the wig. He records the songs. The reveal is buried in a subplot about Cartman using gender identity to access a different school bathroom. But once it is established, it becomes a recurring element of the show's mythology. The Marsh family's income, the show suggests in subsequent episodes, is substantially derived from Randy's music career as Lord, rather than from geology. Season 22 introduced the Tegrity Farm storyline, which became the dominant thread of Randy's character for multiple seasons. Randy quits his job, moves the family to a farm in the country, and begins growing and distributing marijuana, which has been newly legalized in Colorado. The farm is named Tegrity Farms as a portmanteau of integrity and tegrity, a word Randy invents to describe his commitment to doing things right. It is immediately obvious that Randy does not actually operate with integrity, that Tegrity Farms is the same Randy in a different setting, that the farm becomes increasingly corrupt and dangerous and personally destructive as the seasons progress. The self-parody in the Tegrity Farms storyline is the most explicit the show has ever been about its own creators' compromises. Randy is a man who insists he has integrity while accumulating evidence to the contrary. Parker and Stone are showrunners who have built a show on the premise of not selling out while signing billion-dollar deals with corporate studios. Randy's journey through the farm seasons is the show gently laughing at itself, using the character as a vessel for an honesty it might not otherwise be capable of producing. His friend group, when he is not focused on himself, includes Gerald Broflovski, Stephen Stotch, and the other South Park fathers, who gather at Skeeter's wine bar to drink and process the chaos of the show's universe. These friendships are usually minor compared to Randy's central storylines, but they provide a sense of a social world that extends beyond the family. One of the show's most beloved Randy moments is in the episode The Losing Edge from Season 9, in which Randy repeatedly gets into drunken brawls with the fathers of opposing Little League baseball teams. He is spectacular at these brawls. He trains for them. He has a nemesis father named Bat Dad who becomes the final boss of the season's competitive dad-fighting arc. But the baseball storyline itself is about the boys trying to lose on purpose so they don't have to keep playing, while Randy fights his way toward what he perceives as a championship. The two storylines never quite connect, but they exist in perfect parallel, which is the rhythm of the best South Park episodes. Randy Marsh started as a peripheral adult character and became, in the later seasons, arguably as central to the show as any of the four boys. He represents a different kind of failure than Cartman's. Not malicious, not calculated, but somehow more recognizable. He is the adult who never quite grew up, the man whose capacity for self-deception has exceeded his capacity for self-awareness, the father who loves his son but keeps embarrassing him in front of everyone. He is, in his own way, deeply familiar. The episode 2 days before the day after tomorrow from Season 9 is one of the cleanest expressions of Randy as a character. A dam breaks in a nearby town, flooding it. Randy immediately concludes that global warming has caused it, a conclusion he announces with great authority and professional certainty. The town begins hoarding supplies and preparing for the end. The actual cause of the dam breaking turns out to be something far more prosaic and embarrassing, which Randy eventually acknowledges with a private shame that never quite reaches the public scale of his original declarations. The episode is a masterclass in how Randy functions. Enormous confidence on the front end, quiet retreat on the back end, and never quite the reckoning that the scale of the error deserves. So he has run a restaurant called Cafeteria Fraiche while temporarily employed as a school cafeteria chef. He has written and attempted to produce a Broadway musical. He has become addicted to online pornography. He has purchased a Blockbuster video store for $10,000 and attempted to bring back the physical rental model, eventually going slightly mad from the isolation of an empty store. He has competed as a fighter in what is essentially a suburban dad boxing circuit, ascending through increasingly difficult opponents until reaching the legendary figure called Bat Dad, his final adversary in the arc of Season 9's The Losing Edge. He has performed as Lord, recording pop music in disguise. He has grown marijuana and cocaine on a farm he named after a value he does not reliably possess. Off the Tegrity Farms era is worth dwelling on for a moment, because it is the show's longest sustained examination of what happens when someone sincerely believes their own mythology. Randy genuinely believes that his farm represents something pure. He says Tegrity the way a man says it who means it. And then the seasons roll forward and the farm becomes more corrupt. And the contradiction between his self-image and his behavior becomes wider and wider, and he keeps filling the gap with the word tegrity as though repetition could substitute for truth. It is one of the show's most sustained character studies, and it is funny and sad in the proportion that the show does best. About 60% funny, about 40% something else. His DNA test from the episode Holiday Special revealed he is 43% Northern European, and 37% Mediterranean, and 18% Southwest Asian. A genetic profile the show notes is essentially identical to the average British person. Out of this, he was discovered to be 2.8% Neanderthal. The show presents this as deeply meaningful to Randy in ways that are immediately deflated by every other character's indifference. He is 2.8% Neanderthal. He holds this knowledge like it explains something. It does not explain anything. But that is Randy's relationship with information about himself. Always significant, always leading somewhere, never quite arriving. Section 8. Chef, the heart the sauce of the show. Never replaced Jerome McElroy, always and only known as Chef. Aya was the school cafeteria cook at South Park Elementary and the only adult in the show's universe who the four boys consistently trusted. He was not wise in any formal sense. His advice frequently veered into territory that was spectacularly inappropriate for elementary school children. But he was available, he was warm, and he was the only adult who treated the children's problems as real. Chef was voiced by Isaac Hayes, the legendary soul musician, from the show's premiere on August 13, 1997, through the end of its 9th season in 2006. Hayes brought to the role a warmth and musicality that no other casting choice could have produced. Chef's signature mode of communication was the soul song. When the boys came to him with problems, he would frequently respond by bursting into an elaborate musical number that addressed whatever was troubling them, usually in explicitly adult terms that the children did not entirely understand. His most famous song, Chocolate Salty Balls, appeared in the episode Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls from the 2nd season, originally aired in December 1998. Hayes recorded and released the song commercially, and it reached #1 on the UK singles chart in 1999. It also reached #1 on the Irish singles chart. It was included on the Chef Aid, the South Park album compilation from 1998. This means that a song from a cooking character in a crude animated comedy became the most popular single in Britain for a period of weeks. The UK charts of the late 90s contained multitudes. Chef was inspired, Parker has said, by a real dining hall worker he encountered while attending the University of Colorado. The character carries the kind of patient, slightly exasperated warmth of someone who has worked in a school cafeteria long enough to have seen everything and developed an almost philosophical calm about it. He calls the boys children, consistently and collectively, even when addressing one of them individually. The word has an affection in it that the other adults in the show almost never reach. His parents, Thomas and Nellie McElroy, live in Scotland, in Edinburgh specifically, and have appeared in several episodes. They were the source of a running gag about a Loch Ness monster who had been asking them for money for 30 years. $3.50. Loch Ness Monster. That's what you want? $3.50? On this running gag, delivered by Chef's parents with absolute conviction, became one of the show's most beloved bits, primarily because of the specificity of the amount. Not $3, not $5, $3.50. Chef's departure from the show in 2006 is one of the most complicated stories in the show's history, and it has been covered extensively in other contexts, but the core facts are worth reviewing quietly here. Isaac Hayes suffered a stroke in January 2006 and lost the ability to speak. His entourage, which included members of the Church of Scientology, issued a press release in his name announcing his departure from South Park. The timing followed the show's episode Trapped in the Closet, which satirized Scientology at length. In 2016, and Hayes' son Isaac Hayes III confirmed publicly that his father had not quit South Park. His father had loved the role. His father had loved the show. Someone in his entourage, operating without his knowledge or consent, had quit the show on his behalf while he was incapacitated and unable to make decisions. Hayes never got to say goodbye to the character he had voiced for 9 years. He never got to tell the creators he was leaving. He never got the chance to wrap things up properly. He died in August 2008, 2 years after the departure, having never fully recovered from his first stroke. Parker and Stone, in the Season 10 premiere The Return of Chef, used audio clips from Hayes' past performances, spliced together to create new dialogue, and constructed an episode in which Chef is brainwashed by a cult and dies in an extremely graphic sequence. It was, in retrospect, misdirected, a response to what they believed was a voluntary and politically motivated departure, when in fact it had been done to Hayes without his knowledge. Stone has confirmed in subsequent years that once the full picture emerged, they understood the situation very differently. Chef's death is not forgotten within the show's universe. He is referenced in later episodes, including an episode where another character assumes incorrectly that he died by suicide, and is corrected by Butters. In Season 14's Creme Fraiche, Randy briefly takes over the role of school cook and greets the boys with Chef's trademark lines. The homage is played lightly, but it is there. Isaac Hayes was an extraordinary figure beyond South Park, a Grammy-winning artist, the writer of the theme from Shaft, an actor in films including Truck Turner and Escape from New York, and an honorary king of the Outer region of Ghana for humanitarian work he had done there. He brought to the role of Chef a gravity and a musicality that the character could not have had with any other voice. The show has never recast the role, and it likely never will. Chef is gone, and the show knows it. Section 9. Mr. Garrison, a man of many names. Herbert Garrison has been called at various points in his life Mr. Garrison, Mrs. Garrison, Janet Garrison, and the President of the United States. He has been a third-grade teacher, a fourth-grade teacher, a kindergarten teacher, a popular novelist, a political candidate, and the 45th President of the United States of America. He has been a gay man, a heterosexual woman, a lesbian, and, following a second sex change operation, a man again. He is, in the words of Trey Parker, the soap opera element to the whole series. Garrison first appeared in the pilot episode Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, seated behind his desk at South Park Elementary, holding a hand puppet named Mr. Hat. The puppet was introduced as a teaching assistant, though it quickly became clear that Mr. Hat was less a teaching tool and more an externalized voice for things Garrison could not bring himself to say directly. Opinions that were racist, homophobic, politically extreme, and often completely at odds with Garrison's presented self-image. Mr. Hat was Garrison's shadow self, given felt and eyes. Garrison was inspired by two real people. The first was a kindergarten teacher Parker had as a young child in the Nashville public school system, who used a puppet named Mr. Hat as a classroom resource. The second was a British literature professor Parker had at the University of Colorado. Parker has said that the voice he uses for Garrison is a direct impression of that professor, accurate enough that Parker believes former classmates would recognize it immediately. His full name is Herbert Garrison, though this was not established immediately. For the first several seasons, he was simply Mr. Garrison. In the episode Cherokee Hair Tampons from Season 4, his first name is revealed to be Ethan. In a later episode, it is changed to Herbert, and Herbert is what the show settled on going forward. Garrison grew up in Arkansas, which the show treats as the source of a significant portion of his psychological damage. The show depicts his childhood as including exposure to sexual abuse, which Garrison misunderstood as a young boy, and a complicated relationship with his own father, who the show eventually reveals did not sexually abuse Garrison as a child. A fact that devastates the adult Garrison, who had organized a portion of his internal life around the belief that he had been abused, and that this explained his psychology. Throughout the first 8 seasons, the show gradually revealed Garrison's homosexuality through a series of escalating signals. The relationship with Mr. Hat, the affection for certain male celebrities, the inability to connect with women in any sustainable way, the writing of a novel called The Valley of the Penises in an attempt to prove to himself that he was straight. The novel became a bestseller. It did not help. In the Season 7 episode South Park is Gay, Garrison finally accepts his homosexuality and enters into a relationship with a man named Mr. Slave, who joined the show as his teacher's assistant and who the show treats with a kind of delighted outrageousness. Mr. Slave is a character whose entire personality consists of sexual adventurism taken to philosophical extremes, and his relationship with Garrison, unlikely as it is, becomes one of the show's more enduring connections. Then comes the Season 9 episode Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Vagina, in which Garrison comes out as a trans woman, undergoes sex reassignment surgery, changes her name to Janet, and begins a new chapter of her life as Mrs. Garrison. The episode is graphic in a way that is typical of South Park. The surgery itself is depicted in unflinching detail, and controversial in ways that the show has always generated controversy around gender and identity. Mrs. Garrison discovers after the surgery that she cannot menstruate or become pregnant, and comes to feel that she is not actually a woman. But at that point in the show's timeline, the surgery has already been performed and cannot be easily undone. Mrs. Garrison eventually has a second surgery, depicted in the Season 12 episode Ika Penis, and detransitions back to male. Mr. Garrison returns. He is, the show establishes, permanently altered by the experience, but he is once again himself. Starting in Season 19, Bud Garrison launches a political career with a campaign centered on what he describes as getting rid of all the Canadians by a method so graphic the show can barely articulate it. His campaign is explicitly modeled on the political style and rhetoric of Donald Trump. With Caitlyn Jenner as his running mate, he runs as a Republican and, in the Season 20 episode OGs, is elected the 45th President of the United States in a direct parallel to the actual 2016 presidential election. Garrison serves as president for 5 seasons, from 20 to 24, and is never referred to by name during this period, only as the president. Parker has described working with the Garrison as Trump character as one of the most challenging creative experiences of his career, because the actual Trump administration kept behaving in ways so extreme that satirizing it became nearly impossible. By Season 27, the show had introduced a direct portrayal of Trump himself as a separate character, and Garrison returned to teaching. Mr. Hat, the original puppet, was lost and replaced during the series several times. He was once stolen outright. He was once used by Garrison as a prop in a hostage negotiation, which is a sentence that summarizes the character's range fairly well. He was once replaced temporarily by Mr. Twig, a small stick that served as an understudy without quite filling the role. But Mr. Hat always came back. He is, in some deep and persistent sense, inseparable from Garrison, the part of him that says what he cannot otherwise say, the companion who witnesses without judging, the puppet who has been along for the whole strange journey from Arkansas to the Oval Office and back to 4th grade. Parker has described Garrison as one of the most complex characters on the show, and the show's history with the character supports that claim fully and without qualification. In 30 seasons, Garrison has been through more genuine transformation than perhaps any other character in the cast. Identity, gender, politics, relationships, career, public life, private shame, and eventual quiet return. To the classroom where it all began. He has been consistently inconsistent, which is perhaps the most human thing about him, and the thing that has kept him interesting across a run that has outlasted nearly every other animated character of his era. Section 10. The supporting cast, voices from the margins. South Park's world extends far beyond its central characters, And some of the richest details in the show's mythology live in the people who surround the main four boys and their families. This section is for them, the ones who never had their names in the title of an episode, the ones who show up at the edges of the frame and make the world feel wider. Wendy Testaberger is the show's most prominent female character, and she is more interesting than she is often given credit for. Her first name is Winifred, a detail buried deep in the show's lore, but she has been Wendy from the beginning, Stan's on-again, off-again girlfriend and the most politically engaged student at South Park Elementary. She was first voiced by Mary Kay Bergman, and one of the show's original voice cast members who passed away in 1999. She was then voiced by Mona Marshall, then Eliza Schneider, and is currently voiced by April Stewart. Wendy's name was drawn from the wife of one of Matt Stone's friends, Wendy Westaberger, a name that was adapted slightly for the show. She is a dedicated student council president, having held that position for multiple seasons. She is fluent in Arabic, a detail established in the episode Tom's Rhinoplasty, when she arranges for a substitute teacher to be launched into the sun using agents she hired through Arabic language channels. She speaks some Japanese. She was briefly able to speak conversational Chinpokoman language during the Chinpokoman craze. Her relationship with Stan is one of the constants of the show, defined by the fact that Stan gets so nervous around her that he throws up. This began in the first episode, continued through many seasons, and is a running gag that has never quite worn out, because it always feels like an accurate representation of how overwhelming affection can be for someone unprepared for it. They have fought. They have broken up. They have, in one memorable episode, engaged in a full school playground fight. And they always find their way back to each other, or at least back to the same orbit. Tolkien Black, who is known as Token Black for most of the show's run, until the show officially changed his name in the 25th season, to acknowledge that the name had always actually been Tolkien in their files and that the joke had been misunderstood from the beginning, is the only black child in South Park and also the richest. His father is a successful lawyer. His mother, Linda, is a chemist. The family lives in a house that is noticeably larger than any other in the neighborhood. Tolkien is a gifted bass guitarist. The joke that he can play bass guitar simply because he is black, with no prior training, being one of the show's recurring observations on how stereotypes sometimes align with reality in random and meaningless ways. In the Coon and Friends storyline, Tolkien's superhero alter ego is Tupperware, a parody of both superhero names and of the specific pressure a character in his position might feel to choose an identity that represents something. He is one of the more measured and reasonable members of the extended cast, serving as a kind of secondary voice of reason in storylines where the main boys are too far into the situation to see it clearly. Craig Tucker is the most phlegmatic character in South Park. He is defined primarily by his complete and utter refusal to be interested in whatever the main characters are doing. His default expression is blank. His default response to anything is a slow, practiced flip of the middle finger. His voice is a low, flat monotone that communicates such thorough detachment from the events around him that he functions as a kind of anchor, a reminder that the insanity of South Park is not actually normal, even by the standards of the people who live there. His family, the show revealed in the episode Tweek vs. Craig, also flips each other off regularly at the dinner table, as if it is simply how the Tuckers communicate. His father flips his mother off. His mother flips his father off. His sister flips the food. Craig himself barely registers this as unusual. It is just how they are. Craig's relationship with Tweek, established officially in the season 19 episode Tweek Ek Craig, began as a joke. A group of Japanese background female students at South Park Elementary began drawing yaoi artwork, romantic manga-style illustrations, of Craig and Tweek as a couple. The art spread. The school began to believe they were together. Craig and Tweek, who barely knew each other and had previously fought, attempted to stage a public breakup to end the rumors. The breakup did not go as planned. In the process of attempting to convince people they had never been a couple, Craig told Tweek he believed in him, and then Tweek realized Craig was the first person who had. Something shifted. They stayed together. The show has kept them together ever since. In the future timeline of post-COVID, they are still together as adults. They refer to each other as Honey and Babe in private, without irony. It is one of the show's quieter love stories, and it emerged from a gag about fan art. Tweak Tweak himself is a character defined by anxiety. He is permanently on the verge of a breakdown, shaking and twitching and always on the verge of tears, drinking enormous quantities of coffee provided by his parents, who run Tweak Brothers Coffee Shop. The coffee is explicitly why he is the way he is. The show eventually establishes that his anxiety is, at least partially, pharmacologically induced by his parents' product. His catchphrase, "too much pressure," is delivered with the same desperate energy in every context, whether the pressure in question is an actual emergency or someone asking him to pass the salt. He briefly served as Kenny's replacement in the middle of season 6 after Kenny's death, and after Butters was deemed too lame. He was not quite right for the role either, and when Kenny returned, Tweak returned to the extended cast. But the time he spent as a central character gave the show an opportunity to develop him beyond the anxiety joke, and he became one of the richer presences in the supporting world. Jimmy Valmer is a child with a stutter and a physical disability, requiring him to use crutches, who is also one of the funniest characters in the cast. But his disability is treated matter-of-factly by the show. It is part of him without being the entirety of him. And Jimmy's own personality contains layers that go well beyond any single characteristic. He is a comedian, performing stand-up at school talent shows with a level of commitment that the other children don't quite have. He is an accomplished drummer. He is, in the future timeline of the show, the host of a late-night talk show called Late Night with Jimmy, where he is referred to as the king of woke comedy. The episode Up the Downstroid from Season 8 gives Jimmy a full character arc around steroid use in the context of athletic competition. Jimmy, frustrated by his physical limitations, takes anabolic steroids to compete more effectively in the Special Olympics. The episode ends with him addressing the issue directly, calling steroid use cheating and suggesting that professional athletes who use them should reject their accolades. It is the kind of genuine moral conclusion that the show occasionally allows its supporting characters to reach, and it arrives with more weight because it comes from someone who, more than most characters, has felt the gap between physical desire and physical capacity. Timmy Birch is introduced in Season 4 and immediately becomes a fan favorite. He uses a wheelchair and has a cognitive disability, and he communicates primarily by shouting his own name, Timmy. Sometimes he shouts Jimmy, which he does not appear to use as a reference to his friend, but rather as an expression of its own. His parents, Richard and Helen, have the same condition, and they, too, communicate primarily by shouting their own names at dinner. The family portrait, glimpsed in one episode, shows the three of them in their wheelchairs in front of the Eiffel Tower. The show never explains how they got there. Timmy's emotional life is treated with more nuance than the simple gag of his communication style might suggest. He is capable of warmth, of loyalty, of feeling things deeply. He started a band called Timmy and the Lords of the Underworld, which was successful enough to go on tour. In the Coon and Friends storyline, his superhero identity is Iron Maiden, a character who weaponizes his wheelchair. As the South Park Elementary School's extended cast, the background kids who populate the classroom and the playground, contains an enormous number of characters who have accumulated backstories across nearly 3 decades of episodes. Clyde Donovan, who is among the most often seen, is characterized primarily by his tendency to cry and his proximity to Cartman's schemes, despite not being a core member of his circle. Scott Malkinson has diabetes and a speech impediment, and the show treats these as simply part of who he is. Bradley Biggle, it is eventually revealed, is actually an alien named Goxera from a distant planet, whose superpower is Mintberry Crunch, a power that turns out to be genuinely effective when the situation demands it. These characters exist at the edges of the show's main stories, but they give South Park its texture. They are why the school feels like a real school, why the town feels like a real town. They are the faces in the crowd that you start to recognize across seasons, whose presence is never announced, but whose absence would be noticed. Section 11. The town of South Park, a place that has always existed. The town of South Park, Colorado, in the show, is based visually and atmospherically on the actual town of Fairplay, Colorado, which sits in the center of the real South Park Basin in the Rocky Mountains. Parker grew up nearby in Conifer, and the sense of a small mountain town surrounded by enormous empty sky, cut off from the larger world by geography and weather and the particular rhythms of rural Colorado life, is something he has always kept at the center of the show. The fictional South Park is presented as a place where extraordinary things happen with ordinary frequency. Aliens arrive, imaginary characters come to life, historical figures return from the dead, celebrities descend, international incidents originate in the elementary school cafeteria. And the residents respond to all of this with a kind of resigned familiarity, as though they have been living at the intersection of the impossible and the mundane for so long that they no longer find it notable. The town's geography is loosely consistent across the show's run, though it is never mapped with precision. There is South Park Elementary, the central institution of most storylines involving the children. There is Stark's Pond, where the boys often gather. There is the town's main commercial strip with a City Walk Chinese restaurant, and a Taco Bell, a Walmart in later seasons, and a Skeeter's wine bar that serves as the adult gathering point. There is the McCormick house on the south side, visibly smaller and more worn than the other family homes. There is the Marsh house, and the Broflovski house, and the Stotch house, all within proximity of each other in what appears to be a residential neighborhood that contains more than its share of the world's problems. Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh is one of the show's most iconic recurring figures and deserves mention here as a character who is entirely his own category. He is a sentient piece of human waste who appears each Christmas season, accompanied by Christmas music, and spreads holiday cheer through the South Park community. He was introduced in the very first Christmas episode, Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh, on from season 1 and has appeared regularly since. Kyle's mother finds him offensive. Kyle himself maintains that Mr. Hanky is real, and the episode resolves with the town accepting his existence. Towley is perhaps the most self-aware recurring character the show has ever produced. He is a genetically engineered talking towel created by the government to maximize human hygienic potential, who became addicted to drugs and now lives in a state of enthusiastic impairment. His catchphrase, "Don't forget to bring a towel," is delivered with the particular urgency of someone who has one piece of information they consider important and no context for anything beyond it. He is consistently used by the show to comment on the laziness of creating a catchphrase-based character for merchandise purposes. Parker and Stone have explicitly said that Towley was designed as a criticism of themselves for having made too many catchphrase characters. Mr. Mackey, the school counselor, is one of the show's most reliable background fixtures. His full first name has never been definitively established on the show, a joke about the unknowability of certain adults in children's lives. His verbal tick, McKay, appended to the end of virtually every sentence, is one of the show's most imitated sounds. He is well-meaning in the specific way that school counselors are well-meaning, full of frameworks and approaches, not always able to see past them. His episode-length confrontation with drug use? Ian Ike's wee-wee from Season 2 includes his most famous line, "Drugs are bad, McKay." Principal PC, the current principal of South Park Elementary who replaced the original Principal Victoria in Season 19, is a physically massive man with strong convictions about political correctness and a history with a fraternity called PC Delta at Texas A&M. He arrived as an antagonist, rigid, imposing, determined to stamp out anything he deemed offensive, and evolved, over the course of the seasons that followed, into something more complicated. He married the assistant principal, strong woman. They had 5 children together. He became, in the show's later seasons, a character trying to negotiate the demands of his convictions with the reality of raising a family and existing in a world that is not simple. That his 5 children with strong woman, known collectively as the PC babies, are depicted as the most profoundly sensitive beings in the history of South Park, children who cry at anything they perceive as offensive, who require constant reassurance and de-escalation, who represent the show's satirical take on extreme sensitivity culture. They are treated with both affection and mockery in the way the show always treats its targets when it is doing its best work. The town of South Park is, at its core, a mirror, not of one specific place or one specific community, but of the particular American experience of living in a small place where the whole world seems to be happening somewhere else. And yet somehow all the world's problems keep finding their way to your doorstep anyway. The residents of South Park are ordinary people, mostly. They're doing their best in a reality that keeps exceeding their capacity to understand it. They panic. They overreact. They form mobs. They follow trends. They are wrong about things, loudly and confidently, and then they are wrong about the next thing, with equal confidence. And at the center of it all, there are four boys at a bus stop. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, waiting for the school bus every morning, facing whatever the day has decided to produce. They have been there since 1997. They will be there in some form for as long as the show continues. The bus stop scenes, those establishing shots of the four boys standing together against a sky that is sometimes blue and sometimes gray and sometimes white with incoming snow, are the show's heartbeat. They are the place everything begins and the place everything returns to. But before the aliens and the celebrities and the moral panics and the presidential elections, there is just the bus stop. Four children. A Colorado morning. It is, when you hold it at a distance, a beautiful image. Crude and vulgar and beautiful. Which is the only way South Park has ever known how to be anything. Section 12, the parent generation. Families behind the boys. If South Park's four boys are the show's pulse, their parents are the slower, heavier rhythm underneath, the generation that created the conditions the boys are growing up in, and that the show uses to examine with merciless precision exactly how adults fail the children they love. The Broflovski household is, on the surface, the most functional unit in South Park's main cast. Gerald Broflovski is a successful lawyer, intelligent, and largely well-meaning, was capable of genuine ethical reasoning when his ego is not getting in the way. Sheila Broflovski is energetic, protective of her children to a fault, and possessed of a conviction that she knows what is best for the world that sometimes gets ahead of the evidence. Their family observes Judaism with the kind of sincere but flexible dedication that allows for ham at restaurants and debate about the rules. Gerald has a voice that conveys a certain kind of middle-class Jewish professional confidence. He is not loud, but he is certain. His arc across the show's seasons involves the gradual revelation that beneath the surface of a responsible adult lurks the same impulse toward chaos that the boys themselves carry. The most dramatic expression of this is in Season 20, where Gerald is revealed to be a prolific internet troll, and spending his nights behind a pseudonym, posting vile content for the specific pleasure of causing distress to strangers. It is the most jarring character revelation in the show's history after the twist about Cartman's father, not because it is impossible to believe, but because it is entirely too easy to believe. Gerald is, in that storyline, every ordinary person who has discovered that anonymity dissolves accountability and who chose to use that dissolution badly. Sheila's most prominent moment outside of home life is her role in the South Park film, South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, where she leads Mothers Against Canada in a crusade against Terrence and Phillip that escalates into a full-scale war. The film, of course, is a satire of exactly this kind of parental moral panic, and Sheila is its most complete embodiment, convinced of her own righteousness, unaware of how far the momentum of her certainty is carrying everyone. She is genuinely voiced with love, in the sense that the show makes her funny rather than simply monstrous. And she does genuinely care about her children. The question the film keeps asking is whether caring is enough, and whether the care of a person who won't examine their own certainty can produce something other than harm. Stephen and Linda Stotch, Butter's parents, operate in the register of casual incompetence that the show explores particularly in how they relate to their son. Stephen is authoritarian in a specific way, not cruel in intent, but reflexively punitive, defaulting to grounding as the solution to every problem regardless of cause or effect. Linda periodically attempts to kill herself and Butters in moments of depression, which the show treats as running gags in a way that is characteristically South Park. The darkness is real, but it is surrounded by so much absurdity that it is processed as comedy before it can land as tragedy. The show never quite lets you sit with the sadness of Butters' family situation, but it never lets you forget it either. Sharon Marsh, Stan's mother, is often the sanest adult in any given room. She has an awareness of Randy's absurdity that is precise and quiet. She knows who he is, she has always known, and she has made a decision to stay anyway that is not pathetic, but is also not entirely explained. Their relationship involves genuine affection, stretched across genuine incompatibility, Out in the show uses it occasionally to illuminate what long marriages actually look like. Less like romance, more like two people who have developed an intricate private language for managing each other. Sharon has, on occasion, pointed out that the specific chaos Randy produces is something she has organized her life around rather than eliminated, which is either wisdom or defeat, depending on your perspective. She has at least twice decided to divorce him. She has both times come back. She has never explained herself, and the show has never asked her to. Carol and Stuart McCormick, Kenny's parents, represent the show's most sustained portrait of poverty as a family condition. They drink, they neglect, they produce children without evident planning. Their house is small and falling apart, and the refrigerator, on in the episode The Jeffersons, is memorably empty. And yet there are moments, brief and surprising, when their love for their children surfaces in ways that feel genuine. They are not bad people in the way Cartman is bad. They are people who have been ground down by circumstances the show acknowledges but never spends much time examining. Because the show does not deal in sociology so much as in comedy. The McCormicks are funny, and their poverty is part of how they are funny, and the show does not look away from the discomfort of finding that funny. The adult social world of South Park, the dads at Little League games, the mothers at PTA meetings, the couples who gather at Skeeter's wine bar, constitutes a kind of shadow society running parallel to the boys' world. The parents are not wiser than the children. They are the same impulses at a larger scale, with more institutional authority and less self-awareness. They form mobs faster. They panic more completely. They trust experts and institutions in ways that the children, who have seen enough of experts and institutions to be skeptical, do not. The show uses this parallel consistently, and it never quite resolves the question of which generation is worse. They are, the show tends to suggest, reflections of each other. Section 13. The Extended Classroom. Characters who made the world bigger. South Park Elementary exists as a place where American public education is treated with the same mixture of affection and satire that the show applies to everything else. The teachers are incompetent in specific, documented ways. The counselor tries his best within a framework that does not quite fit the problems he encounters. The principal over the show's history has changed multiple times, each change carrying its own weight. And within the classroom itself, beyond the four main boys and their immediate circle, there exists a second and third tier of characters who have accumulated, across nearly 3 decades, enough texture and backstory to populate a smaller show entirely. Pip Pirrup was one of the show's original supporting cast members. A British boy in a school full of American children, permanently out of place, permanently cheerful about it, in the way that certain kinds of loneliness produce a specific type of brightness as a defense. He was based on Pip from Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, a fact that one episode makes explicit by staging a full parody of the Dickens novel with Pip at its center. His voice was soft and polite and English in a way that the other children found alien and irritating. He was, for years, the character most likely to be dismissed or excluded by the main group. In the Season 4 episode Pip, the show dedicated an entire episode exclusively to him, which remains one of the stranger and more ambitious experiments in the show's history. He was eventually killed in the Season 14 episode 201, impacted by the same wave of celebrity giant Mecha Streisand that devastated much of the town. The show did not make much of his death, which was itself a kind of commentary on how overlooked he had always been. Scott Malkinson is a 4th-grade student who has diabetes and a speech impediment involving a slight lisp and a slow, measured delivery that the show always plays with affection. He has a background presence in many classroom scenes and has received occasional spotlight treatment. The show has given him enough specific characterization over the years that he feels like a real person rather than a background element. A kid who has dealt with a medical condition since early childhood and has developed the particular combination of practicality and occasional resentment that such a history tends to produce. Dog Poo Potowski is a student who appears infrequently but who has been part of the South Park Elementary background since the earliest seasons. His name is what it sounds like, and the joke is that no one treats it as unusual. He is just Dog Poo, another kid in the class, wandering through the background of 30 seasons of American animated comedy without anyone stopping to ask why. David Rodriguez joined the classroom in season 20 and has become an increasingly prominent presence in subsequent seasons. He is one of the more grounded supporting students, less a vehicle for any particular running gag and more a genuine ensemble presence who participates in the show's group storylines without being defined by any single characteristic. Clyde Donovan deserves a bit more attention than his usual billing as a secondary character suggests. He is one of the most visually consistent members of the extended class, and he has been woven into the show's mythology in ways that accumulate weight over time. He cries. He cries rather readily. Compared to the other boys, and the show treats this not as weakness but as a neutral characteristic, just part of how Clyde is built. He has been Cartman's right-hand man in multiple schemes, which says something about his susceptibility to flattery and his desire to be included, even when inclusion costs him something. He was briefly the villain of his own arc when Cartman named him co-conspirator in a plan that went badly enough to get him into serious trouble. Bradley Biggle's revelation as Mint Berry Crunch, the superhero powered by the taste and essence of mint and berries, is one of the show's most committed, absurdist payoffs. The Coon and Friends storyline builds slowly toward the revelation that one of their number is actually a genuine alien hero, the one with the power to actually stop the threat they're facing. And when that hero is revealed to be Bradley Biggle, a kid who barely registers in the show's usual ecosystem, the comedy comes from the specificity of the power and the completeness of the delivery. Mint Berry Crunch saves the world. The world is saved by Mint Berry Crunch. The show earns this. The science teacher Mr. Garrison replaced, after his various departures and returns, is a character named Miss Choxendick, who served as the boys' fourth-grade teacher during portions of Season 4 through Season 6. Her name was a recurring joke the show deployed with patience rather than urgency. She is introduced, she teaches the class with a certain firm competence, and the show holds her name in reserve until it can use it most efficiently. She died in the Season 6 episode Child Abduction is not funny. Her death explained to the students as natural causes while the show implies something more complicated. She is, in the show's history, an example of a supporting character who was given enough definition to matter and then removed before she could become stale. Strong Woman, who serves as assistant principal and later principal of South Park Elementary, arrived with PC Principal and has become one of the show's most quietly effective supporting characters. Her relationship with PC Principal, which begins during what the show describes as a consensual but ethically complicated workplace dynamic, evolves into a genuine partnership, and their family of PC babies is one of the more sustained comedic constructions in the later seasons. Strong Woman has her own convictions, her own professional identity, and her own frustrations, which the show is increasingly attentive to. She is not defined by PC Principal. She co-defines their shared storyline from a position of equal authority, which is exactly the kind of character development that the show sometimes remembers to do and sometimes does not. The school nurse, the cafeteria staff after Chef's departure, the various substitute teachers who float through when Garrison is suspended or fired or transitioning, all of these constitute the institutional infrastructure of the school, the human machinery through which the show's education satire runs. They are largely interchangeable in plot terms, but collectively important in atmosphere. South Park Elementary feels like a real school partly because of the boys and their lives, and partly because of all the unnamed faces in the hallways who look like they have been doing this for years and have no particular plans to stop. Section 14, the show's longest relationships. What 28 seasons of friendship actually looks like. There is something worth sitting with at the end of all of this. South Park has been producing new episodes since August 1997. The boys have been standing at that bus stop for more than 27 years. The friendships in the show, the ones between Stan and Kyle, between Kyle and Cartman, between Butters and basically everyone who has ever treated him badly and somehow not driven him away, are among the longest continuous relationships in the history of animated television, even accounting for the show's floating timeline and the fact that nobody ages. Stan and Kyle have been best friends since the first episode. Their relationship has survived more bizarre circumstances than most real friendships encounter in a lifetime. Intergalactic events, presidential elections, death, the death of their friend Kenny several hundred times over, and the ongoing social exhaustion of living adjacent to Eric Cartman. What Parker and Stone have said in various contexts over the years is that Stan and Kyle are their friendship, are the animated expression of what it has felt like to be two people who have been working together and been close for 30 years. The arguments Stan and Kyle have, the moments where they let each other down, and the reconciliations that happen without much ceremony because the friendship is simply too deep to stay broken for long. All of that is personal for the creators in ways that go beyond craft. Cartman and Kyle's relationship is in the same framework, the relationship that defines conflict rather than friendship. It is the relationship that asks what it costs to know someone who fundamentally opposes everything you value and why you would continue to maintain that knowing. The show's answer, offered across hundreds of episodes, is that some connections exist not because they are good for you, but because they are real. Because the antagonism between two people can be as binding as affection and sometimes more honest. Cartman needs Kyle in the way that a fire needs something to burn. Kyle needs Cartman as a location for his own convictions, a reason to keep holding to what he believes because the alternative is letting Cartman win. Kenny and everyone else is a relationship. The show approaches with a specific sadness that it almost never makes explicit. He is present and then he is gone. He is there at the bus stop and then he is not. The other boys are sad when he dies in ways the show usually deflects through the running gag. The scripted, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and the scripted, "You bastards." And then the sadness is metabolized and the episode continues. But the Mysterian arc revealed something that changed how those earlier moments look. Kenny has known all along that he would wake up again. And he has also known that nobody would remember. He shows up anyway. That he brings his full self to a friendship that will not hold the memory of him. That is a kind of generosity that the show has never been able to name directly, but has been illustrating for 30 seasons. Butters and the boys is not a friendship in any traditional sense, at least not in the early seasons. He is used by them, returned to them out of convenience, excluded when they find someone more interesting, and he keeps coming back. In the later seasons, something shifts. Cartman's cruelty toward Butters diminishes. The boys include him more naturally, with less calculation. The relationship becomes something more like actual friendship, uneven, complicated, historically burdened by what has happened in it, but real. Butters has earned his place in the show's world not by becoming less who he is, but by being so relentlessly himself that the show eventually built the world around him. The four boys together, the original four, at the bus stop, are a specific kind of unit that the show has always treated as precious, even while it subjects that unit to enormous stress. They have disbanded and reunited. They have betrayed each other and apologized. They have gone through versions of the same argument across 2.5 decades of episodes. And they are still there, still at the bus stop, still waiting for the bus in the early Colorado morning, surrounded by mountains that are the same mountains they have always been surrounded by, under a sky that has absorbed an extraordinary amount of animation over the years without changing its particular quality of light. There is a line in the show from Cartman. It is spoken in a moment of unusual vulnerability to the other boys. It used to always be the four of us. Always. That line, spoken by the character who has probably done more than anyone to threaten the group's unity, carries more weight than almost anything else the show has ever written. Because it is true. It has always been the four of them. And despite everything, despite every scheme, every death, every fight, every season that tried something new, it has stayed the four of them. That constancy is not accidental. It is the thing the show has protected across all the other things it has been willing to sacrifice. The jokes have changed, the targets have changed, the political landscape has transformed around the show in ways nobody could have predicted in 1997, and the world around the show has changed enormously. But the four boys at the bus stop have remained. And as long as they are there, the show is itself. That is a kind of stability that is genuinely rare in comedy, and it deserves to be named as such. Closing. That is where we will leave things tonight. All the way from Stan's bus stop to Kenny's bedroom ceiling, from Cartman's yellow mittens to Chef's smooth voice, from Butters' apple song to Randy's tegrity to Kyle's green Ushanka hat that never comes off. We have covered the four boys and the families behind them, the teacher who is everything and nothing all at once, the cook who was the only adult the children ever fully trusted, and the supporting world of people who make South Park feel like a real place. There is still more being. There will always be more with a show that has been running this long, but this is a good place to rest. The mountains outside South Park are still where they have always been. The bus stop is still there. And somewhere in a small Colorado town that does not technically exist, four paper children are standing in the morning air, waiting for whatever comes next. If you made it all the way to here, thank you. Genuinely. Hit subscribe if you have not already, and leave a comment with what brought you here tonight and where in the world you are listening from. Sweet dreams out there, wherever you are.